And it looks like we're live. I'm JMatt with our Self-Care Sundays feature that we do every Sunday. We at least started it in the early phases of May. So if you're just watching this episode for the first time, there are several episodes you can go back and watch. We've got PTSD, anxiety, therapy, so many different episodes you can watch. But today I'm very excited to be welcoming Kody Green with me. He is known as SchizophrenicHippie on TikTok, and he has his own company. He's got so much going on. But today I really want to chat with him and learn more about schizophrenia. So welcome, Kody.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
How about you introduce a little bit about your background and what schizophrenia is like in your life?
Yeah, so as you said, my name's Kody, and I come from a really unique background. I actually, not only do I have schizophrenia, I was raised by a mother who has schizoaffective disorder. So for those of you who don't know, schizoaffective disorder is actually a combination of schizophrenia and bipolar. So I've seen schizophrenia both as someone who suffers from it and someone who lives in a home of someone who suffers with it. So I have a really unique perspective on it. And on top of that, I've dealt with a lot of different things in my past. Before schizophrenia, I had, issues with drug addiction and alcohol addiction. And that's why I also talk a lot about recovery and addiction and, life after incarceration, because I also dealt with that. So I have just a lot of unique experiences that I think people really connect with, which is what made my TikTok page really blow up. I think was I started just telling my stories and people connected with them. So
over 100,000 followers that are intrigued by you specifically, your story of schizophrenia and all that you've gone through. So congratulations for growing that big of a following.
Yeah, it's been crazy because I started in October, so we're not even a full year into me creating this page, and I just wasn't prepared for how big it was going to get. I basically came on with the mindset that I was like, hey, I need basically what people do when they vlog. I need my own diary where I can talk about whatever I need to. And I didn't really expect any viewers. So for it to just grow like that was insane.
How long do you think it took you to get to 100,000? Or when did you start on TikTok to where you are now?
One more time for me, it cut out.
Yeah, no worries. When did you start creating content on TikTok?
So I watched content for I'd say about 2 or 3 months. Okay. But I'm a really outgoing person. So from day one, I started watching videos, and I was like, I feel like this platform could be used for so much more than it is. Mm-hmm. And in TikTok's defense, I feel like the platform has grown a lot since I first joined. There is a lot of really unique content on there now that I feel like wasn't on there maybe 6 months to a year ago. So it's really nice to see all these different creators doing new things. And there are more mental health creators, and there are more people talking about different types of industries that, I don't think kids expected to learn about on TikTok.
Yeah. And I think the great thing about TikTok is it's making every second count. So people are adapting and finding a way to share their message in such a concise way that really holds people's attention.
Yeah, and that's the nice thing is anyone can share their message. It's not limited to any person, It's not that I have a better message than anyone else. It's I had a message, I started talking about it, and people liked to hear about it. So,
yeah. Well, let's just jump into the topic of schizophrenia, because I got a lot of questions. And if you, the viewer, have any questions at all about schizophrenia, feel free to comment. We'll feature it on the screen here and answer them the best we can. Mostly Kody will be answering them because I don't know anything about schizophrenia aside from what I've seen and researched. So in your own words, Kody, what is schizophrenia?
So to me, schizophrenia, just so you know, my diagnosis is undifferentiated schizophrenia.
Okay.
So essentially, I show symptoms of each type. So I have paranoia, visual hallucinations, audio hallucinations, and also delusions. So I've experienced all of these, sometimes all at the same times, sometimes separately. It's really unique in that form. Some people with just paranoid schizophrenia might not, ever have to deal with auditory or visual hallucinations. So I have a really unique perspective where I've dealt with all the major symptoms of schizophrenia. But to me, it is, losing touch with reality, because day to day, I don't know what's real and what's part of my, my mind's creation. So people in my life, I'd say 90% of the time they're real, but 10% of the time I'm talking to someone who isn't there. And I think that's what people don't understand about schizophrenia, is that there's two things that people, I think, don't get. Is the first one is people think it's very internal, like it's all happening in my head. And although that may be true, scientifically, but to me, in my reality, it's all very external. The voices I hear aren't in my head. The things I'm seeing aren't like, when my eyelids are closed. It's all around me, and it's very real. Right. And then I think the other thing is just like the ability to like realize what's real and what's not is very compromised when you start having delusions. So like there are things that you would think, oh, if you saw someone in your house when no one's home, wouldn't you think about that? I get that question a lot.
Right.
But once the delusion aspect starts, it's no rhyme or reason to why something's happening. It's just happening, and I can't explain it.
How do you gain trust in a situation where you're experiencing delusions?
People ask me this a lot on TikTok, and I've always said, do not try to convince someone dealing with paranoia or delusions that what they're seeing or hearing isn't real, because you will not win that battle.
Right.
Really, the only things that have helped me in the process is medication and therapy, because there was even a point where when my paranoia and delusions first started, I thought my mom and my wife were trying to work together to put me away in the psych ward. And then for a short while, I thought my wife was trying to poison me, neither of which were true, obviously. But it was that, you can't fix that idealist, those ideas going through your head, because you're not the one creating them.
Right.
It's completely involuntary, and it is really hard to build trust if you're someone who's going through that, because you don't know who's real or what's real, because the mind just becomes so complex that everything seems like it's a scheme.
Right.
Especially people who are trying to convince you it's not. So oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I didn't mean to cut you off. I more so meant like, instead of like getting friends and family to trust you, how do you trust yourself?
Oh, honestly, I've never had an issue with that, because I feel like even though I've been told to do things by my voices, I think one big misconception with people with schizophrenia is that they're violent. And I know the media and news and TV shows love to portray violent schizophrenics, and it's just not a reality. If you have seen any of my videos of me actively having hallucinations, I'm scared. I'm frightened. Right. The reason I'm able to trust myself is because at that time, I feel like I'm the only one defending me from what's going on around me. I have way more trouble trusting the things around me than I do myself, I guess would be my answer.
Okay. You did touch about the entertainment media portrayal kind of showing schizophrenia as violent and aggressive and dangerous. Have you seen any movies or any sort of media out there that has represented schizophrenia well, as you said, not in a violent way, but you'd say, okay, that's a fair depiction of what schizophrenia is?
As someone who gets a lot of those questions, people ask me about certain movies and books, and I just, with me being a full-time student and trying to go back to school and, trying to start up this business, I don't get a whole lot of time to engage with that kind of media. Yeah. Unfortunately, I can't off the top of my head think of any really good representations. So like, I always talk about the movie Fight Club, because like the way he's immersed in it, I just use that example. I know it's a crazy movie, but I use that example because like how real it is for him. Like the whole movie, you don't really understand what's going on. That's exactly how it is. And actually, I have an updated version of that now. Have you seen the new Joker movie?
I haven't, but I'm well aware of it.
Okay, so there's, they don't say his diagnosis is schizophrenia, and he probably has a lot of different diagnoses, but there's one part of the movie where I'm not trying to spoil this for you or anyone else in here, but there's a giant section of the movie where he thinks he's building a relationship with this woman and they're talking frequently. And then all of a sudden, without any warning, it shows you that that wasn't true. Like that. And that was a big portion of the movie, where he's like meeting this woman and they're connecting and she's going with him to this and that. And all of it was in his head. And that, I think, was a really good representation of how real hallucinations are, because you're completely immersed in them, And it's also a good representation of how long they can last. People think, oh, hallucinations, you see them like 10, 15 minutes. I've gone days with having the same hallucinations or the same delusions. I went probably a couple years having a consistent delusion that I was in a coma from a car accident. So like when it's happening, it's very real and there's really nothing you can do to like stop it.
You touched on past experiences. How old were you when you were diagnosed with schizophrenia, and how long do you think that you, in hindsight, are aware that you were experiencing it?
So I always tell people I started having them at 19 and I was diagnosed at 21. And I know that because I see my wife left a comment here. She left the heart.
Yeah.
My wife was actually the one who had to kind of point it out to me. Yeah. So this is my wife with a picture of me as her profile picture. But she actually was with me before I was diagnosed. So me and my wife met when I was about 15. We started dating when I was 17. And around 19 years old, when I was in college, I did have an issue with drugs. But even when I wasn't actively using drugs, there was something that wasn't right, and she was able to start pointing it out to me. But like I said, with those delusions, I didn't want to believe it. And I denied it. And she stuck with me and really helped me, figure out that I needed to seek help. And if it wasn't for her and, having a mom who had a schizophrenic diagnosis, probably like 10 years prior, without those two, I don't know if I ever would have went in and got diagnosed. I was pretty content, just, self-medicating and letting my life fall apart, because that was the best thing I could do at the time in my own mind,
You mentioned the drugs, and I'm kind of curious, like, what causes schizophrenia? I've heard that it's partly genes, it's partly other factors. Did drugs come into effect, or was it just more or less coping, as you kind of suggested?
That's hard to say, because even to this day, it's really hard for anyone to know what causes it, because if the doctors and scientists can't tell me, it's like I can only make my own assumptions.
Right.
I would say, I did use drugs, but I wasn't like a heavy drug user until the hallucinations started.
Right.
So, I drank a little bit and I partaked in some other things, but it wasn't until the hallucination started that I started to get into harder drugs and started taking them way more frequently, because it was the only thing keeping, I like to say keeping the demons at bay, but for some people with schizophrenia, that's all too realistic statement. And it's just with causes, they know for sure that genetics plays a role. It's like 15 to 20% chance of getting schizophrenia if your parent has it. So genetics plays a role and they're aware of that. But when it comes to the rest of it, it's kind of up in the air. They say that there's environmental factors that increase your chances, but that's anything from issues with birth to drug use to trauma. Like there's so many things that could, increase your chances. It's kind of hard to know what would and would not cause it.
Okay. Patrick has a question. He says, I have a friend who has schizophrenia, and he has mentioned when he smokes, his hallucinations are much more vivid and feels more real. How does smoking affect schizophrenia among most?
So, and I can only speak from personal experience and from those around me. And I don't ever advocate for smoking. I'm assuming he's talking about marijuana here.
That's my guess as well.
Okay, so I don't ever advocate that because, it does have hallucinogenic properties. That being said, I know there's people who have had success with it, and I know there's people who it agitates. I've had a little bit of both. I have had successes with it, but I've also had it where I feel like it's made it worse, primarily because of paranoia, not so much the hallucination aspect. But I do know people who it has made it a lot worse, I've seen it on both sides, and I I can only vouch for what I've seen. I don't know statistically or medically what the proof is, but I do think there's, you know, potential to study. I use CBD products, and that helps me with paranoia, anxiety, because when I start having hallucination, my anxiety increases. And the worse my anxiety gets, the worse my hallucinations get. And it's a never-ending cycle. So I do use CBD to help primarily with hallucinations, but you know, when it comes to actual THC, doctors usually recommend not doing it because it does have those psychiatric effects, you know.
You mentioned taking CBD for anxiety. What are some other sort of symptoms or side effects? I don't know if that's the right word, to having schizophrenia, like suicidal thoughts, things like that.
Yeah. So, I mean, you know, depression is pretty common with people with schizophrenia. It's usually after they're diagnosed, because once I know I was diagnosed with depression after schizophrenia, because it's really hard to have someone tell you that a portion of your reality is not real. It was a really tough thing to deal with. Not, you know, I had to go into this like, okay, so I can never be 100% sure that the things around me are real, or that my life is even real. So, you know, depression is very common. Suicidal thoughts, I think, tend to be more, for me, in my experience, it wasn't because of the depression. It was because hallucinations were telling me to do certain things that I wasn't comfortable doing. And, you know, yeah, I appreciate you putting that number down there too. I try to get that resource out as much as possible, because I don't think a lot of people know about it. There was a close call for me, and I didn't know there was resources out there, but that's just one symptom. I know anxiety is super common, because if you're having paranoia and hallucinations, you're going to be anxious. But as for other things, they're starting to see more of a trend of people having schizoaffective too.
Okay.
That's seeming to be a higher representation of schizophrenia nowadays. 1 second.
No worries. I've been thinking that I could have a protest walk down the street because I live in downtown Milwaukee. It's very probable that could still happen yet.
Yeah, my neighbor picked an awesome time to start mowing the lawn. So
awesome, yes.
But yeah, so
I know there's a common myth that schizophrenia is the same thing as multiple personality disorder. Do you want to touch on that?
Yeah. So, and just so you know, the updated diagnosis for multiple personality disorder is DID. So now it's actually dissociative identity disorder. It's the same thing. It's just, you know, it has a new name.
Okay.
And so that is a really big misconception. I get people, when I tell them I have schizophrenia, they're like, oh, so you have a bunch of people in your head. No, it's actually very different. So I feel like DID, and I don't know enough about DID to get into it too much. I know the basics. Right. But like I said earlier, schizophrenia is very external. And DID is more within yourself. You are actually it's multiple personalities, like you said, within one person. Whereas schizophrenia is, yes, I see a lot of people, but they're all around me. No one's within me. You know, I'm still one person. I still am in complete control of what I do and the actions I take. Whereas someone with DID, you know, their host is what, like, I think that's the word they use for it. The person who carries the personalities, they might not have as much of a say once another personality takes over.
Okay.
And like I said, I can't talk too much on it, but I do know that it's a very different thing. And like you said, it's very commonly misrepresented.
Yeah, when I saw it was a myth, because I looked this up a couple of days ago, I was like, well, I don't think I really associated the two, but then I could see where that misperception kind of comes from, because from the way you're describing it, schizophrenia is you, the individual, are experiencing all the delusions and all that sort of thing. Whereas multiple personality disorder, DID, from what I know, is the host or the actual person. I don't want to offend anyone that has it or knows people with it, but they basically disappear and somebody else takes over.
Yeah, essentially, yep. That's what it is. You know, it's like I said, I think the big difference for me when I look at the two is internal versus external. That's how I look at it, because for me, that makes it easier to understand. I think in reality, it's way more complex than that. And there's a lot that goes into DID that I'll never understand. So,
yeah. And if anybody knows somebody that experiences DID, I would love to chat with them on a future episode. What sort of
connect you to a couple people for that?
I'm down. I really want the series kind of continue with so many different topics. There's so many mental illnesses that I'm not even aware of that I would like to learn more about, and I'm sure the viewer would like to learn about too. I would like to know more about the obstacles that you face. I know you own your own company. You have a history that involves incarceration. What sort of obstacles are you facing today, and how are you overcoming them?
So, I mean, a common obstacle I face in my current life that I deal with is I also mentioned I'm back in school now. So something that I've dealt with recently is when I start a new class, I'm very upfront with my teachers and other classmates that I have schizophrenia. And I have a perfect example of that because last semester, I got overwhelmed in class and I started having hallucinations that someone was sitting behind me and he was yelling at me and I couldn't focus. So I turned around and I actually went to go knock over the desk and I started yelling. No one overreacted because I had told them prior that I had schizophrenia. And although a lot of people can't tell because my medication does a really good job and day to day I get by, but when it comes to being in public places, sometimes I have hallucinations that I can't control. And it's different if I'm at home. It doesn't bother anyone. Right. Most of the time I won't even know what's going on unless my wife is home. But when I'm out in public, it becomes very noticeable to people. And I think people will assume I'm on drugs or they assume that, I'm just an unmedicated schizophrenic or it really depends. But it's, getting over my day-to-day challenges are just letting people know that I struggle with it. So it doesn't have to become a conversation after I have something happen or after I need to, get sent into the hospital and all that. I even wear a medical ID bracelet, not required, but it says Kody Green, schizophrenia, possible delusions. Because there are times where I've had blackouts or, I'm just so afraid of what's going on around me. It's easier to have this than to have to explain to a medic or a police officer what's going on with me.
That's great. I have another question, but I think it pertains to how young can someone be when they start noticing symptoms? Do you know?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a really interesting question because I feel like this is, to me, I knew this because my mom had schizophrenia. So I started researching at a very young age. But I think a lot of people don't realize, even if you have the genetics for schizophrenia, you usually don't show any symptoms until you're 18. Okay. The largest majority of diagnosis for males anyways is 18 to 25. Okay. And I don't think people realize that because childhood schizophrenia happens, but it is very rare. Schizophrenia is 1% of the world's population, and childhood schizophrenia is a fraction of that. And I don't know of any cases at birth. They say that when it does happen with childhood schizophrenia, it tends to be anywhere from 10 years old to puberty. Now, obviously there's cases outside of that range, but that tends to be the childhood age range. And like I said, it's just super rare. So if I meet people that have childhood schizophrenia, I always ask them a lot of questions because I think that'd be so hard to navigate because how do you communicate that with someone when you're that young? And I wonder if there are people dealing with it at a younger age and they can't recognize it until they're older too. So even to me, that's a really interesting topic. I just don't know a lot about what it would be like to deal with it at that age.
Yeah. With the age, regardless of the age, 18, I think you can still be bullied regardless of your age. And I know you've made some videos kind of saying, hey, don't do this to me, or I hate when this happens. Then you can see via TikTok, how do you handle online trolls and bullying in general when it comes to schizophrenia?
Well, once I started getting 50, 60, 70,000 followers, I knew that the trolls were coming sooner or later. Yep. I would say that people, a majority of the time, 99.8% of the time, are genuinely curious. They want to learn more. They know someone who suffers with it. I have mostly positive comments, but you're always going to have a couple people who like to, try to make it difficult for you. And I think the video you mentioned, the one that you're trying to talk about, is the one where someone had commented, good story, but who's that behind you?
Oh, yep, that's the one.
Yep. And I made a video just mentioning like, hey, that's not super triggering for me because I'm medicated and all that, but like, why would you do that to someone has an issue with their day-to-day reality, And so I did make a whole video about it because, like, for me, it's not a huge deal, but I have a lot of followers who have schizophrenia or have brothers or sisters or parents or grandparents with schizophrenia that they show on my page. Like, even though it's a comment on my video, you could possibly be triggering those people too. Mm-hmm. And I think I look out for them more than I look out for myself sometimes, because these people have given me the opportunity to be a part of their daily life, and like, when it comes to that kind of stuff, it's like the best way to deal with those people is I try to delete the comments without giving them what they want, which is attention.
Okay. Is there anything else that you wish that people would stop doing or saying in regards to schizophrenia?
Stop being afraid of people with schizophrenia. Now, I know I said that like it was at you. That was not
right. No. I don't take it as me.
Okay. But yeah, so like a very common thing, I noticed that when I, started telling people about my diagnosis, all of a sudden people are afraid that I'm not stable enough to be around. And I say this repetitively on my page. People with schizophrenia are way more likely to be the victims of violent crime than to commit violent crimes. And that's why I encourage people to look at my page and watch my videos, because if you watch my hallucinations, I'm not violent. I think there was one video where I was so flustered that I did throw some stuff off my desk, but I never would hurt someone in that state. Mostly what I'm trying to do is protect myself from what's happening around me. So I think that is what bothers me the most. And the media doesn't help with that, portraying, anytime there's a killing now, a mass shooting, they go straight to mental illness about it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's, I know that's something you had mentioned talking about. So if you have a question specific to that, I'll let you ask it before I keep going here.
Oh, no, I'm just curious about schizophrenia right now. And going on beyond what you wish people would stop doing, what are some things that help you from your wife, your mom, your family, your friends? What can people do more of if they want to help support you?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a really good question. I think it is a little different for each person. So I want to start by saying that, what helps me might not help someone else. I'm just giving you guys an example of like what helps me. Mm-hmm. And I just like to say that because everyone's a little different. Mm-hmm. What tends to work for me, and my wife has been really good about like studying schizophrenia and trying to understand so she can help me better. But she's been really good at realizing that the best thing for me is to not draw attention to it. If I'm having a hallucination, she doesn't point it out. She doesn't be like, "Oh, are you okay? You're hallucinating." What she does is she brings up something totally different. Distractions are literally how I've kept, in my mind, distractions are why I've been able to deal with my schizophrenia. People ask me how I work full-time, go to school full-time, start my own business. I do social media, I would say pretty close to full-time. I'm on there about 40 hours a week. And people ask how I do all that. And I tell them I have to. Being busy and distracted has been the most positive results for me. And that's why I encourage, my wife and my mom and anyone I'm around. I tell my friends too, like, hey, if you see me doing that stuff, don't point it out. Especially don't like start talking to it like it's there, because all that does is solidify it for me. Mm-hmm. You start engaging with my hallucinations, now they're absolutely real to me. Because if someone else sees them, I'm like, oh, okay, go along with it, Right. So the best thing for me is to get my focus away from whatever I'm dealing with, and my wife's been really good at that. She's super goofy, so she always finds a way to like make me chuckle, or like we have a lot of, we've been together like almost 9 years. So a lot of inside jokes she can bring up. And that's what helps me. Medication obviously has been my savior though.
How long have you been on the right medication?
So, I was diagnosed at 21, and the day that I got my diagnosis, I started medication. So we're going on, this year will probably be like 5 years on medication.
So you were lucky enough from diagnosis to find what was the right dosage and everything for you, or was there some kind of learning grounds for you?
Oh yeah, no, definitely not. It was much of a learning curve. So, I'm going on 4 years now. We're getting to a point where I still deal with it, but it's just not as frequent, and it's not as, I don't like to use this word, but my hallucinations used to be almost violent. And so it's just less frequent, less intense, and less violent.
Okay.
And when I say less frequent, I mean like I was going every waking minute to dealing with this down to like a couple hours a week. Maybe I have some hallucinations or delusions.
Okay. Well, that's great. I don't necessarily know every question to ask on this topic. So
Yeah.
I'm curious from you, are there any other common questions about schizophrenia that you get that I haven't asked yet?
I mean, I can think of some off TikTok, one, and I kind of touched on it when you asked like what I would prefer people do to help me.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people ask, how do I help my family member or friend who has schizophrenia? And that's why I started off that last bit by saying, I don't know the cure all for everyone, but I will say that from my experience being like someone who's reached out to a lot of people with schizophrenia, I used to be a peer facilitator for NAMI. And what I've realized with most people with schizophrenia is engaging with their hallucinations to try to normalize it and make them feel better is really the worst route you could go with it. It's okay to like, I've even had people just kind of ignore it and let it go by. I don't mind that. But if you start engaging with their hallucinations just to, you don't want them to feel bad or feel awkward or like, I see a lot of people do that because they just want to help the person and they don't want them to feel like they're an outcast. And like I said, to me, that solidifies it. The minute you do that, the minute my brain is like, okay, someone else sees it. So we're good. We're in the clear.
Yep.
And so I just really encourage people not to do that because, I'm going to throw a fact out there. If anyone needs to fact check it, you can go to NAMI's website.
Okay.
But about 1 in 20 people that are homeless have schizophrenia, which is crazy amount.
Yep.
It's insane that we have that high of a rate of people with schizophrenia on the street when schizophrenics only make up 1% of our population.
Yep. And that's probably unmedicated too. People that aren't able to get access to that help and resources that they need.
Yeah. And if it wouldn't have been for my mom and my wife, like I tell people all the time, and I actually heard this quote from Michelle Hammer. She's another schizophrenic person who deals with like, she does a lot of mental health advocacy and she's the owner of Schizophrenic NYC. And she used to be on a podcast that is one of the reasons I started advocating for schizophrenia. And she always said, I'm the luckiest schizophrenic because I had resources, I had supportive family members, and, I had people that were there to help me when things got the worst. And if it wasn't for all that, who knows where I'd be, It would have been very easy for me to keep doing drugs and end up on the street.
Yep. Well, thank you for joining me.
Yeah.
I want to plug a couple of the things that you have going on, one of which is merchandise. I really like the design that you have, by the way, because it is the semicolon with kind of the hippie vibe. I believe I have it up here. There we go.
Yeah.
So if you're interested in this, it appears to be shop.spreadshirt.com/Kody Green, Kody with a K. And he's got a bunch of merch here if you want to go on and chat about it a little bit.
Yeah, and that was, I had a few other designs. I got one of them here with me, actually. So, it started with this, like, the tie-dye thing, with being schizophrenic hippie. I had to go with, like, the tie-dye design. So here's my actual schizophrenic hippie. This is also available on the site. And there's also Schizo Squad in the same design. But, that semicolon is a really common symbol for mental health awareness. I'm planning on getting, I know a lot of people with semicolon tattoos. I plan on getting one too. And so I wanted to incorporate my current design with that semicolon idea. And I had the same person who made this design for me whip that up, and people love it. Ever since I posted it, a lot of people like wearing it. I think people were uncomfortable wearing the Schizophrenic Hippie merch or the Schizo Squad merch.
Yep.
Because, people would message me asking like, hey, I don't have schizophrenia. Is it okay if I wear it? And I said, it's meant to be schizophrenia awareness,
Yep.
more than anything. So I absolutely support that. But I could tell people were unsure. Where this, you can wear it. And then if someone asks you, you can really dive into what it's about. If you're not comfortable, you don't have to. You can still openly support it and just, rock that merch. And people seem to like that.
Yeah. And then one other thing I want to talk and let you touch on is one opportunity hire.
Yeah. So, like you touched on, I do have a past with incarceration. And I, shortly after, I was going through all my drug issues. I did end up with a few charges that landed me in jail. And when I got out, I was finding it really difficult to find jobs, even though I was super qualified for the jobs I was applying for. So I started, looking at going back into school, and I got back to school for human resource management. And I realized it's an issue through the entire industry, and people are talking about it now. Like SHRM, which is the Society for Human Resource Management, has actually been openly supporting second chance opportunities and second chance hiring. And it's something that, for the first time ever, we're seeing a lot of support on. So when I got back into school, I realized there's really nothing like it in Wisconsin. And if there is, it's not like super well known, and it's not in my area. So I decided to just jump in and start with a website, and that turned into an actual, office space in La Crosse, and that turned into just this whole big thing that we got going on. And now we are putting in our application for nonprofit status, and it's just the overwhelming amount of support from the local community and from TikTok and from my YouTube. People love the idea because I'm going to throw another fact out there. If anyone needs to fact check it, you can go to, I think this one is also on NAMI because they talk a lot about incarceration and mental health. But 1 in 3 working age Americans have a criminal record now. So it's almost harder to find someone without a criminal record than to find someone with a criminal record. And when these people are being pushed to the side just because of their past, we're really limiting the amount of people we can get into positions. So
I'm just pulling up the NAMI website right now, just for anybody curious. Just doing a quick search for schizophrenia and whatnot. So there are resources here, NAMI.org, for those that are going to do their own research after this live.
Yeah, and I will say too, I know a lot of the groups aren't established yet since COVID, but I know nationwide, NAMI is a really good resource for peer support. So like me, the reason I was able to start doing this kind of advocacy was because of NAMI. Mm-hmm. NAMI is the group that I went to when I was first diagnosed. They usually have, regular support groups and then family support groups if you have a family member dealing with it. And so I went to both, and then I went and got my peer facilitator certification. Mm-hmm. So NAMI is just a super good resource, and they are nationwide. And I know they try to have at least one facility in every county. In Wisconsin, there's just a few counties that don't have NAMI groups established. And if there isn't one in your area, reach out to National NAMI, and chances are they'll probably help you get one started.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your Sunday talking with me and the viewers about schizophrenia, your experiences and all that. Is there anything else you want to touch on while we have a couple minutes left, or do you think we covered it?
I think we did a pretty good job. I really appreciate you having me on, and the questions were really good, insightful questions that I get commonly. So I really appreciate that. And you're going to have to let me know when we actually get that Wisconsin TikTok set up going on.
I really want to get that going. So that's actually how the two of us kind of connected, because I had that idea to do a collaboration with Wisconsin-based TikTokers, and then, COVID happened and I had to cancel it. But you were one of the people that reached out and said, hey, I'm down to collab. And this, in my opinion, is one of those ways to collab. So
absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And before we cut this episode out, I do have a future episode coming. Let's see, is it on there now? Yes, Sunday, June 14th, which is next Sunday, 3 o'clock. We're going to be discussing eating disorders with Paige Pickler. She also represents Project Heal and many other things. So if you are somebody that struggles with an eating disorder or knows somebody that does struggle with eating disorders, this is the episode for you next Sunday. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next weekend.